I've done a series. This is the last, at least for now, the last video in a series on this Mercury new to me 4-stroke. I got this 4-stroke, 60 horse Merc, 2001 model. I got it on a free boat and a free trailer, which is another project. You can watch the videos on the SunRay rebuild. That's elsewhere on the channel. Go look up that playlist if you want to. But I've had trouble with this. I did a little bit of maintenance on it before I put it on the boat, changed the timing belt, and there was a video on that, and pressure checked the bottom end and a few other things. Put it on the boat. I was disappointed in early trials, and you'll see some of the videos are regarding that. It would only go up to about 4,100 RPM, and then it would peak out, and then sometimes it would just utterly fail at the 4,200. And I couldn't get it to go any faster. It was so well defined that I thought it's ignition or something like that, but I couldn't find anything there. I did different things, replaced fuel lines and fuel filter internally, replaced the fuel pump, replaced the primer line, different tank. I've got quite a few tanks down there, different sizes and shapes. For whatever reason, I've accumulated a few. Replaced fittings, all sorts of things like that. No joy. I saw expert help. The carburetors are on this side. This is a carbureted model, 2001. It went to fuel injection after. But I had the carbs rebuilt and resynced at a Mercury shop. And it was tank tested, and I saw the tank test. It ran well in the tank, but you couldn't get it quite up to full RPM because the tank's only like 3 foot by 6 foot by 4 foot deep, and this thing just pumps water everywhere, so you can only briefly get the throttle up, and it's not loading things the same as in the boat. Tried it out on the water. Problem is it behaved pretty much the same. In fact, it started to behave worse. You'd advance the throttle, and as you advance the throttle forward at 3,000, it gets a little rough, and then beyond up to 4,000 smooths out a bit. At 4,000 it starts to get a little rough, and it basically between 42, 44, boom, and it would just drop the RPM, and you'd pull the throttle back, you couldn't catch it. It was just dead. At that point, I again got the mechanic out on the water with me, and he was hanging off the back here with the cowl off, and various tests were ran it from a test tank, and basically did a couple little touch-ups on the carbs, but it basically said, your engine is running properly, your problem is your propeller, okay? And I just thought, no way, I don't see how that is propeller. That I was assuming that if it was overpitched, that it would behave differently, and it wouldn't be rough going up to that point. I just didn't believe it, really. And I said, well, what about the smoothness? Yeah, I'll get more RPM if that actually is what it is. If it's limiting based on torque, and I'm only getting to 4,400 or so, what about the roughness in between? He says it'll behave like a different animal. So indeed, they were kind enough. Happy Days. Happy Days is the name of the dealer. They lent me a brand new propeller. This is a Spitfire propeller. Same as this one. This is a Spitfire. This one I got used. This one's 13 pitch. That's because that's the same pitch I had on the Evinrude before, even though it's a different diameter. Even though the Evinrude's a 2-stroke, I thought, well, I'll start with a 13-inch pitch. Here's the original 50 horse, the 2-stroke. And what we've got on it is was a 3-blade, 13 pitch, but a 3-blade, and it's larger. It's 11 3/4 inches, as I recall, diameter. That's a Solus prop. So that was the only thing that really was in common with this to my first try on that motor. The only thing in common was 13-inch pitch, and I thought, hey, that's going to get me close. And it's a 4-blade. I thought I'm going for 4-blade instead of 3-blade because I want the low end torque or transfer to the water, into the water and thrust. So that's what I started with. I had to straighten this prop out a little bit. It's just for, it's got a minor crack or two in the, very fine in the tips after straightening, but this is just for trial purposes. Anyhow, 13 pitch, he said, we can get an 11. So there's an 11. 11 is, so 10 and 5/8 diameter, 11 pitch. Let's see if you can tell the difference. It's very subtle. It's not a really big difference. You can see. So the black one is looking a little flatter than the silver one. So the silver is the 13. So 13 inches per revolution as it goes through the water. This one's flatter. This 13 would be like this, 11's like that. 11 inches per revolution as it goes through the water. This did make all the difference. Max RPM went up to 55, 56, 100 RPM. We're actually getting usable power to the motor. And because the torque demands of the propeller now more closely were lower to begin with, and were more closely matching the torque output versus RPM of the motor. Well, because of that, it was smooth all the way the range up. This one, when it hit 3,000 RPM, it was just not quite making, it was making just enough torque to turn this thing, and then it got a little better up to 4,000, then it just died because it didn't have enough power. And once you got to 42, it maxed out the amount of torque the engine supplied to it. As soon as you give it more throttle, it gave more gas, but the amount of air going into the motor didn't change because it was still going the same 4,200 RPM. Extra gas, bleh, it choked out and would die. And I couldn't catch it by dropping the throttle back. I couldn't catch it. It would go dead to 0 RPM, and I'd have to start it again. The reason it went dead is it just still had all that fuel in the cylinders, and it had to pump it out yet. So when I reduced throttle, I couldn't catch it and keep it running. So that's a mouthful. So the prop made such a difference. And one thing with this, if you had it at high throttle and suddenly chopped the throttle, it would also die sometimes. It doesn't do it with this one. So this is smooth all the way up. I can advance the throttle quickly. I can reduce it quickly. It's a different beast. It behaves properly. You might notice it only goes, let's say 55, 5,600 RPM. The red line on this is 6,250. But in general, depending on the boat and what you're doing, mechanic tells me, and I have read, that 5,500 to 6,000 is just fine as a target RPM. And considering that this boat is used mostly at low speed, it's canals and rivers, we only occasionally need to go on plane, and I'm quite happy with the performance at 5,600 RPM. This thing's making, well, against the Detroit River current, it was making 18 miles an hour. So I know on flat water, no current, no wind, we'd be doing 20 miles an hour. That is plenty enough for a little houseboat. And it all comes down to the torque curve of the motor output versus the demands of that propeller. The demands of the propeller are based on the propeller design, the RPM, and how fast the boat goes. And how fast the boat goes is partly due to the displacement. This thing, when it's fully loaded, is on the order of 3,000 pounds or so. Sort of a heavy little houseboat, but it's a 71 HOBO, and you can see details of this on the channel. This took about 3 years to rebuild, and but now it's good to go with new power, and we'll have future adventures to report. One final note, you notice the two plastic wings here. They're bolted, you can't see in the light here very well, they're bolted to the anti-ventilation plate. I had to drill four holes for them. I took this off the 50 horse Evinrude because I found it helpful before when we had it on this boat. And what this will do for us is two things. One is this motor is 250 pounds. It's, I don't know, something like 60 pounds heavier than the two-stroke was. And so the boat sits a little lower. This wing will give more authority when I do the trim, hydraulic trim. It'll give it a little more authority to lift the back end and influence the attitude of the boat. And right now, it's fairly nose high. That's one thing, and I want to be able to bring the back end up a bit. So that'll help that way. The other thing is at planing speed, when going 18, 20 miles an hour, it's sucking a lot of air down into the prop, a lot of water down into the prop, and occasionally air gets into the prop. You go across some chop and it will skip. So what the wing will do is the water normally without the wing is being sucked in and then shot out. This will prevent it from being sucked straight down in. It sort of lowers the water level when it gets sucked in, but it'll force it to go a longer path down and then there. And so this will always keep water, the prop in water. And then when it shoots out, this guides it and deflects it out as well. So that's the idea anyhow. And you really only find that out by trying it. The 50 horse, it had good effect, and I think I need it on this as well. So all I had to do was drill 4 holes and put the 1/4-inch bolts in, and it transferred right on. So you can try it on your boat. It isn't the answer to every problem. So we're all set to go in the spring, taking this boat to Florida. Thanks for watching the series on this motor. Hopefully there are no other major developments on this motor. Otherwise, you'll see more in this particular playlist.